Many people know bits and pieces about the famous Kennedy clan, but few have fully discovered the whirlwind life of John F. Kennedy's younger sister, who refused to be held back by convention or fear. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy was the rebel, the charmer, the one who forged her own path in a family that prized public image, tradition, and achievement. She was raised in the glow of power and privilege, yes, but she was anything but predictable. It is in her contradictions that we find the most fascinating truths. A devout Catholic who married an Anglican nobleman, a free spirit bound to one of the most famously strict matriarchs in American political history, and a woman who embraced the British lifestyle so fully that her happiest memories were of English countryside picnics rather than the hustle of American politics. Her story isn't just about high society and stately mansions. It's also about heartbreaks that arrived in succession. Her beloved brother's death in war, her husband's fatal service in the same conflict, and ultimately her own life cut short in an unexpected accident. Yet through it all, Kathleen's joy for life was so strong that people described her as lightning in a bottle, impossible to capture or contain, yet luminous whenever you glimpsed it. By the end of this story, you might wonder how you ever overlooked this captivating Kennedy sister. You might feel both enchanted and unsettled by her breakneck journey, which flickered brilliantly before ending in a tragedy that felt, to all those who loved her, painfully abrupt. And you might understand in a deeper sense why her family found it so difficult to speak of her loss. So settle in, because this story is about more than a forgotten socialite or a sidelined footnote of the Camelot legend. This is Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy's life, recast in all its color, heartbreak, and glow. From the vantage point of the early 21st century, it's easy to look back at the Kennedys and see them as the quintessential American dynasty, wealthy, powerful, connected, seemingly unstoppable until the tides of history turned in unpredictable ways. But when Kathleen was born on February 20th, 1920, in the family's home in Brookline, Massachusetts, the Kennedys were still finding their stride in American politics and business. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., her father, was ambitious and savvy, building a fortune through investments, Hollywood studios, and, as some have speculated, side ventures that skirted the edges of the law. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, her mother, was devoutly Catholic, the daughter of a prominent Boston politician, and determined to instill discipline and moral structure in her children. For the Kennedys, devout faith was more than Sunday church attendance. It was woven into the family's identity, shaping the roles they played on the world stage. In this deeply disciplined environment, it might surprise you to learn that Kathleen was known to everyone simply as Kick, a nickname earned from her spirited personality. She was the life of any room she entered, equally beloved by siblings, friends, and, as it would turn out, British aristocrats alike. Her father once remarked that she could make an entire crowd laugh with a single wry remark, an ease that would serve her well in adulthood. Even as a small child, she was forging connections and alliances with her quick wit and warm charm, stepping into a bigger spotlight in her teenage years. Joseph Kennedy was appointed U.S. Ambassador to the Court of St. James in 1938, a highly prestigious position at the center of diplomacy and social life in the United Kingdom. For Kathleen, this was more than just a move abroad. It was like stepping into a storybook world of peers, barons, ladies, and manor houses. Arriving in London at the cusp of World War II was an experience that shaped her worldview immeasurably. She had never been shy, but the warm whirl of British social circles brought out her vivacity in a new way. She embraced everything, from late-night parties to daily tea traditions, forging friendships that would remain central to her life, even when war scattered everyone across the map. She soon became a darling of the London social scene, admired for her good humor, dancing prowess, and the ability to connect with anyone, regardless of their rank or title. Now let's pause to appreciate the backdrop. The late 1930s in Britain were a paradoxical moment of glitter and tension. On one hand, the upper crust continued to host lavish galas and soirees, clinging to a sense of normalcy. On the other hand, anxieties about Germany's aggression grew daily. Britain's declarations of war, blackouts, rationing, and the Blitz would soon transform life for everyone, forcing them to confront the fragility of their world. Kathleen witnessed the transition firsthand. One moment she was dancing at the embassy in a swirl of satin with some bright-eyed nobleman. The next she was hearing air raid sirens punctuate the night. This entire era would prove foundational not just for her worldview, but for the personal relationships that would define her adult life and cause her both exquisite happiness and excruciating grief. What many people don't realize is that Joseph and Rose's children were deeply, if quietly, affected by the swirl of political events they found themselves in. The children attended formal parties, but they also saw behind the scenes in an ambassador's household, hearing private conversations about looming threats and the role the United States might play in what was fast becoming a global conflict. Kathleen, known for her inquisitiveness, listened to it all, forming her own beliefs and opinions. She learned how to charm even the stiffest of dignitaries, developing a knack for reading a room that would help her navigate social complexities. During this time, an important figure emerged in Kathleen's life, William John Robert Cavendish, Marquis of Hartington, colloquially known as Billy Hartington. He was a member of one of Britain's most storied aristocratic families, the Cavendishes, Dukes of Devonshire. The family seat, Chatsworth House, evoked images of endless rolling lawns, art-laden halls, and perfectly manicured gardens. While the Kennedys weren't exactly strangers to wealth, the Cavendish dynasty boasted centuries of tradition and land holdings that dwarfed what the Kennedys, with all their bravado, represented in American life. Yet Billy was not the stereotype of a haughty aristocrat. He was gentle, thoughtful, and somewhat reserved. Where Kathleen was breezy and talkative, Billy was polite and measured. But that turned out to be precisely what drew them together. People who observed them said that Kathleen sparkled enough for both of them, and that Billy was the unwavering center of calm around which she could dance. Though their friendship began casually, two young people navigating the circles of British high society, it soon became clear there was more than a spark. The complication? Kathleen was Catholic, Billy was Anglican, and in the 1930s, Britain, that represented more than just a personal preference for worship. Marriages bridging that Catholic-Protestant divide were frowned upon by both families. In the Kennedys' fiercely Catholic household, the idea of a union with an Anglican aristocrat was unthinkable, especially to Kathleen's mother Rose, who maintained an unwavering stance on the church's teachings. But Kick was never one to let obstacles stand in the way of love or adventure. Still, any idea of marriage had to be postponed once war reared its head more fiercely in Europe. In 1939, Britain declared war on Germany, and life for the Kennedys, as well as for the Cavendishes, changed drastically. The world Kathleen had grown to love, the society events, the sparkling galas, began to shudder under the weight of impending danger. Her father, the ambassador, grew increasingly concerned about Germany's aggression and advocated controversially for a policy that some perceived as appeasement. The Kennedys returned stateside in 1940, and Kathleen felt her heart break as she left England. uncertain if she would ever return. The transition back to America was jarring. Suddenly she was home in a country not yet fully at war, but swirling with debate about what role it should play in the global crisis. Meanwhile, her father's reputation took a hit when he publicly expressed doubts about Britain's ability to withstand the war. For a time, Kathleen tried to settle into American life, even enrolling at Finch College in New York, but her thoughts and her heart remained across the Atlantic. This next phase would be marked by deep personal tragedy and unbelievable tenacity. War changes everything, and for the Kennedys that meant two of Kathleen's brothers, Joe Jr. and John, enlisting in the U.S. military. Joe Jr., often considered the Golden Son, was a pilot. John, though suffering from health issues, joined the Navy. Kathleen watched anxiously from the home front. She kept in touch through letters, poured her longing for peace and normalcy into her diaries, and tried to hold on to some semblance of hope. One bright spot, an opportunity to return to the UK and volunteer with the Red Cross, offering services to soldiers and civilians battered by the Blitz. Against her mother's wishes, Kathleen seized the chance, determined to prove that her ties to Britain were not just a passing fancy but part of her identity. Once she arrived, she reconnected with friends from her earlier social circles. But the war overshadowed everything. She saw the blackouts, the rubble left by bombings, and the stoic British spirit that reminded her of the resilience she admired in her own family. It was during this time that her romance with Billy Hartington reignited. It was no longer a matter of two youths dancing at embassy balls. Now they were two people in the midst of global upheaval, searching for love and stability wherever they could find it. Kathleen decided that if they were to be together, they would simply have to confront the religious differences. Her father was more open-minded about it, though not thrilled. Her mother, on the other hand, remained firmly opposed. Yet, in 1944, in a modest ceremony without her parents present, Kathleen and Billy were married. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect was that John F. Kennedy, future president, and famously one of the more devout siblings, supported her choice and even traveled to Britain to give her away in place of their father. It was a testament to how beloved Kathleen was among her siblings, that John, despite the family's Catholic tradition, stood by her side. The wedding took place in a registry office quite far from the elaborate Catholic rites Rose had always imagined for her daughters. For a time, life seemed to promise a glimmer of happiness. Kathleen took the title Marchioness of Hartington, and while that came with certain aristocratic duties, managing social appearances, living in the stately family seats, mingling with British high society, Kathleen carried her vibrant spirit with her. She hosted gatherings that were less stiff than the usual noble fare, infusing them with an American sense of fun, inviting Allied officers and British guests to break bread and dance together. But this newlywed bliss would be heartbreakingly brief. Billy, as a member of the British Army, was sent to the front lines in Belgium. Only a few weeks after their wedding, he was killed by a sniper's bullet in September of 1944. The shocking loss shattered Kathleen. She had risked her family's approval, faced down the religious divide, and endured the separation caused by wartime mobilization, only to be widowed before they could truly begin their married life. In the span of a few months, Kathleen went from being a hopeful bride to a grieving widow. She was barely 24 years old. Many in her position would have returned home to the U.S. for solace and security among family. But Kathleen chose instead to remain in England for a while. She found comfort in the quiet British countryside that she and Billy had dreamed of enjoying together. There's a little-known story that around that time, Kathleen visited a small cottage in Derbyshire that overlooked a lush valley. She sat alone, reading over letters Billy had sent her, tears rolling down her face in silent waves, until dusk turned into night. A local villager, noticing her distress but not recognizing who she was, approached to offer a cup of tea. Kathleen smiled through her tears and graciously thanked them. It was a poignant moment that underscored how, despite her grand connections and wealth, she was just a grieving young woman in need of simple, human kindness. Then came another crushing blow. Her brother Joe Jr., the family's golden heir, was killed in August 1944 on a mission to pilot a special explosives-laden aircraft meant to take out V-1 rocket sites in Germany. Though Kathleen had been close with John, whom she affectionately called Jack, her bond with Joe Jr. was something else entirely. He had been her champion, the one who shared her sense of adventure and mischief. This double tragedy, losing both her husband and her brother in quick succession, left a wound that would never truly heal. She developed a profound understanding of the fragility of life, an awareness that might explain the speed at which she chose to live whatever time she had left. As the war concluded, Kathleen found herself at a crossroads. She spent some time traveling between the U.S. and England, unsure where she fit in. She could return permanently to the Kennedy fold, live out a conventional post-war American life, or she could remain in Britain, where she felt free yet painfully lonely without Billy. Her mother, Rose, tried to draw her back into the Catholic framework, encouraging her to find solace in faith. Kathleen did maintain her belief, but she wrestled with the sense that her heart no longer belonged to that narrow set of social expectations. Slowly, she began to re-emerge into the British social scene, forging new friendships and renewing old ones. Her personality shone again at parties, though many who saw her said there was a new undercurrent of sorrow, like a light that flickered slightly dimmer than before. One of her more controversial relationships during this period was with the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam, Peter Fitzwilliam, a wealthy man with a reputation for living fast and unapologetically. He was married, though separated, and in the process of a divorce. Their bond scandalized not just British society, but also appalled Rose Kennedy, whose devout Catholicism made the idea of her daughter associating with a divorcing man anathema. There were rumors that Kathleen and Fitzwilliam were planning to marry once his divorce was finalized, though some accounts suggest they merely enjoyed each other's company in a shared pursuit of excitement and distraction from lingering grief. Either way, it reflected the pattern in Kathleen's life. She refused to live according to the script expected of her, even if it meant clashing with family, tradition, and societal norms. Tragically, this chapter too would be cut short. On May 13th, 1948, Kathleen boarded a small plane bound for the French Riviera with Fitzwilliam. The details are well documented but still chilling. Bad weather over the mountains, poor visibility, and a fatal crash that claimed both their lives. She was only 28 years old. News of her death reached the Kennedy family in waves of shock. This was a clan that had already lost Joe Jr., but losing Kathleen, so vital, so beloved by her siblings, so young, felt like a cruel cosmic twist. The family was plunged into yet another mourning period, and this time the heartbreak was compounded by the knowledge that Kathleen had been traveling with a man who was not her husband. Rose Kennedy's grief was tangled with disappointment and confusion, a conflict she struggled to reconcile publicly. Joe Sr. flew to Europe to bring her body home, but it was eventually decided that Kathleen be buried in Derbyshire, near her late husband Billy's family seat. In a quiet corner of the Cavendish family plot, her grave would be marked simply, overshadowed by centuries of aristocratic tradition, and ultimately overshadowed in the public eye by the unstoppable rise and tragic ends of her brothers Jack, Bobby, and later Ted. If this were a conventional biography, it might end there. A star-crossed daughter, undone by heartbreak, and ill-fated love, lost in a plane crash. Yet when we look more closely at the controversies and debates that swirl around her memory, we see a more complicated portrait. First, there's the question of her religion. Some accounts suggest Kathleen was excommunicated for marrying outside the church, which her mother vehemently opposed. Others insist that while Rose was disappointed, Kathleen maintained her Catholic faith in private, attempting to live a spiritual life in her own way. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, complicated by the religious fervor of the time and the enormous pressure placed upon high-profile families. Then there's the question of her relationship with Peter Fitzwilliam. Historians differ on whether they were truly on the brink of marriage or if it was more of an informal companionship. Letters she wrote around that time suggest she was deeply conflicted about the path forward. She worried about how to navigate the Catholic and social obstacles, even if the Fitzwilliam divorce became final. Yet she also expressed an eagerness to find happiness again, to remake a life that had been shattered by Billy's death. As often happens in historical debates, the evidence is incomplete, and the people who knew the truth best have long since passed away. The controversies linger, coloring her legacy with a mixture of admiration, disapproval, and curiosity, just as she might have expected given her determination to live boldly. In terms of historical significance, Kathleen's story resonates far beyond a mere footnote in the broader Kennedy saga. She represents a fascinating intersection of American exuberance and British tradition at a pivotal moment in history. Through her, we glimpse how the Kennedys built transatlantic connections that would serve them politically and socially for generations. We also see how Catholic identity and family loyalty could shape and sometimes constrain the choices of even the most independent-minded of the Kennedy children. And of course, her life is a testament to the ephemeral nature of existence, echoing the tragic theme that would come to define much of the Kennedy family narrative. Every life lost changed the course of their collective story, and Kathleen's absence was felt keenly by all who knew her, especially by John F. Kennedy, who often referred to her fondly in private conversations. One seldom-told anecdote offers a poignant glimpse into the emotional aftermath. In 1963, while visiting Ireland, just months before his assassination, President John F. Kennedy took a private moment to reflect on his siblings, who were no longer alive to see that historic trip. According to a personal aide, JFK mentioned how Kik would have loved to be here, imagining her laughter and that bright energy lighting up the entire affair. That simple remark, heartbreakingly offhand, underscores how beloved Kathleen was within her own family and how her loss remained an unspoken ache. She was not merely a sister, but a partner in mischief, a confidant, and one of the few people who could tease Jack without inhibition. Even decades later, for those curious enough to trace her footsteps, Kathleen's memory lingers in two places: a corner of Massachusetts, where her childhood home once stood, and the rolling hills of Derbyshire, where she rests amid an aristocratic family plot. Visitors sometimes stumble across her gravesite by accident, surprised to find a Kennedy name etched into a traditional English cemetery. Yet many who do visit say they feel a certain aura there, a reminder that life's most adventurous spirits often find themselves in unexpected places. The British often recall her as the engaging American who brought a bit of sparkle during wartime gloom. And in the States, a handful of historians and Kennedy aficionados keep her memory alive as the sister who lived on her own terms, digging for hidden details about Kik yields a treasure trove of personal testimonies. One friend recalled that Kathleen once danced until dawn at a fundraiser in London, then spent the next morning volunteering at a battered hospital. Another recounted a humorous moment when Kathleen, bored with a stuffy tea event, whispered a joke so witty that even the notoriously stern Winston Churchill struggled to hide his grin. Such stories are rarely mentioned in mainstream Kennedy biographies, which often focus on political achievements and the tragedies that befell the male members of the family. Yet these tidbits reveal a woman whose compassion matched her sense of fun, and they remind us that the saga of the Kennedys isn't just about elections, assassinations, and political legacies. It's also about personalities that refuse to fade quietly into the background. Looking back, it's easy to wonder, what if Kathleen had lived longer? Would she have eventually mended her relationship with her mother? Would she have returned to the U.S. to play a role in Jack's presidency? Or perhaps more fittingly, would she have carved out a comfortable life in the British countryside, bridging two worlds as she always seemed able to do? These are hypotheticals we can never resolve, but they highlight the sense of promise that her death left unfulfilled. She had the charisma and self-assuredness to chart a remarkable path, whether in charity work, diplomacy, or perhaps even politics, in her own right. But fate had other plans, leaving us only the fragments of her tale. And so we circle back to the emotional and moral threads that her story offers. Kathleen "Kick" Kennedy shows us how a thirst for life can shine even in the darkest times, how personal warmth, curiosity, and fearlessness can break down barriers of class, nationality, and prejudice. She demonstrates that even in a family often characterized by rigorous discipline and high expectations, it's possible to stand out by following one's heart, no matter the cost. Yet her tragedy also reminds us that living at full throttle can leave us vulnerable in ways we least expect. Kathleen's story matters because it deepens our understanding of the Kennedys as a real family, flawed, bound by love, and forever marked by heartbreak. She was more than just the sister of a future president. She was a beacon in her own right, beloved in British social circles, and cherished by her American friends and siblings. By rediscovering Kathleen, we also reclaim an essential piece of what shaped the Kennedy mystique, that intangible spark of adventure mixed with heartbreak, the unwavering confidence shadowed by tragedy. She was the living embodiment of the complicated dance between tradition and rebellion, and her life, however short, carries lessons about courage, individuality, and the high stakes of forging our own path. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.